Please welcome Hannah Rothschild.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. Thank you. I'm not so eloquent that I can do this entirely without notes. So I apologise for not being quite as fluent as some of my colleagues here. Thank you, Peter, for what you said. I wanted to talk first about milestone years. I think we all have milestone years. Possibly last year was the worst milestone year for me politically. I think 2008 was the worst milestone year financially. The most important years, I suppose, personally, were the birth of my three children. I think, I'm trying to remember this, get this right, but I think it was 94, 97, and 98, but I might have that wrong. Thank God they're not here. But there's another one in amongst that, and that was 2004, and that was the first year I went to Hay. And I never imagined that that long, long train ride to Wales would be such an incredible, pivotal journey for me, and a pilgrimage, in fact, that I've made again and again. And I went, and I don't think she'll mind, I went actually, the first person who asked me there was Sabrina Guinness, who was famous for saying the only book she'd ever read was Vogue. So I was quite kind of apprehensive about what I might find at the other end. And Peter, you're absolutely right. I went there to try and start a film series, and I've been working in documentaries for a long time. I made my first film in 1998. And when I rang Alan Yentob and Melvyn Bragg to say, would you come to Hay, it's the first time they've ever answered my telephone calls. So there you go, there is the power of Hay. So in that first year, it was in the school, and we sat on tiny chairs and we washed our hands in Lilliputian basins. It was a very strange experience, and I remember hearing Doris Lessing. I remember hearing Terry Jones talking about Chaucer. I heard Germaine Greer. I heard John Updike. Who knew John Updike was alive, and let alone in Wales? And I wasn't hooked. I was superglued. That was enough. But I was also deeply envious because I couldn't ever imagine the possibility that I might stand on a stage and talk about something that I'd written in front of an audience of strangers. And that seemed to me to be an impossible dream, but one that I rather wanted. Now, people will talk about what happened on stage, a little bit about what happened off stage, because Hay is a lot about off stage. And I was lucky enough to stay at a house called Cyfalfa, which was owned by Rob and Revel Guest, who are extremely generous. And I was sent when I arrived up to the nursery floor, and I couldn't understand why there were saucepans all over the floor until it rained that night. And then I knew. In the next door rooms there was Rosie Boycott, who's become one of my closest friends, Nick Broomfield, Joan Bakewell, Sabrina, and various others. And it was an extraordinary thing, Hay, because you had what was going on in the stage, and then you had off stage. And for example, it wasn't abnormal to have Supper Cooked For by Jamie Oliver or Rose Gray or Ruth Rogers. It wasn't abnormal to have Jules Holland play the piano for you. There were so many moments. It wasn't, I remember one night Robert McNamara in his underpants goes into a bathroom and finds Rosie Boycott wearing, I think, slightly less than underpants. We had, what else happened? The Colombian ambassador nearly died when his loo fell through the floor. Absolutely. When Neil Ferguson heard that Jamie Oliver was called the naked chef, he took his clothes off and became immediately the naked historian. There was one wonderful day when we were in the car park and it was incredibly muddy, and this very, very nice, very elderly lady was in a car, and we couldn't quite get the car out of the car park, and there were 4 or 5 of us trying to push the car out of the car park, and we just needed one more person to help us. And who should walk past but George Osborne, wearing a pair of very, very clean Wellingtons and a very clean suit. And we looked at him expectantly, and he shrugged, and he walked on. If that's not a metaphor. And it's true. So what is the magic of Hay, and what has Peter Florence done for all of us? And you'll hear this again and again tonight. What is it? I mean, I think it's partly that you're taken out of your comfort zone to a field, quite literally. And there's very little phone reception. There's no internet, or there may be now, but there certainly wasn't for the first 10 years of my visit. And it's also that you can go and listen to these extraordinary people talk about subjects that you would never normally know. I've never learnt about snake wrestling before. It's true. I now know a little bit. I don't know about the stars, or I didn't. There is every single subject that you can imagine. And what is rather marvellous about it is that there are these very, very extraordinary people who turn out to be very ordinary. and you sit there and you listen. So in 2009, I made a film called The Jazz Baroness for the BBC, and when I finished it, I was very proud of it, but there was a lot more to say, and I knew that it had to be a book. But I was still much, much too timid. I thought writers were born writers with kind of pencils, and it was a talent, and you knew you had it. So I felt that, as I was well over 40 then, it was out of the question. But something had lodged, and I think one of the things about Hay is it does teach you that you can possibly have dreams. And every year, Rosie Boycott and I sit down at Hay and we write a wish list about what we'd like to achieve that year. And I'm not going to embarrass her or me by telling you some of the things that appear quite often on that list. But that year, I wrote down at the end to write the first draft of The Baroness. And it seemed an impossibly audacious thing to want to do. And on the way home, I started to write down some of the things that I'd learnt from listening to so many extraordinary writers at Hay. And I wrote down, I found it the other day, number 1, everyone has to start somewhere. And number 2, there is no right way to do it. Some treat writing like a job, 9 to 5, some like a midnight assignation. Some use a special pencil, some anonymous cafes. Writers should really be called rewriters. For most people, first drafts are just a sense of direction. Creativity, I wrote down. 2% inspiration, 98% perspiration. And my absolute heroine, Maya Angelou, had told us all to sharpen our pencils on the scars of loneliness. So then I started the following morning, and The Baroness was published in 2012. And 2 years later, again, following Hay, I had another dream, which was The Improbability of Love, which Peter has spoken about. And like a proud mother, I brought both of those books back to Wales, and I launched them there. And I discovered that one of the greatest joys imaginable is to articulate how one feels and what one truly thinks about a subject close to your heart. And that is why I continue to write. And that was the gift I got in a field in Hay. Thank you.